I don't like to be overly dictatorial towards shows that I like, but yeah, no, these would all be bad ideas. So as of the time of my recording this, my most viewed video is, and has been for a while, 5 things that Doctor Who needs to stop doing. And I've kind of felt like I am overdue to sort of look at the other side of that. That video, obviously, as you can tell from the title, talked about things that Doctor Who has been doing that I wanted it to stop. This one, you might think the flip of that is me saying things they should definitely do, except I don't have as firm a thought about what I think the show should do. I mean, there are characters I'd like to see come back. I've done, some stuff revolving around that, and there'll be some more like that. But this time I want to talk about 4 things I don't ever want the show to do. Why 4 and not 5? Because I couldn't think of a 5th that I actually cared all that much about, and I don't like to pad my lists. So we're going to talk about 4, and we're going to start with a spin-off on Gallifrey. I have talked before about how I generally don't like things set on Gallifrey in the first place because either due to the limitations of the budget and what they can realize, or to the limitations of the imagination of the writers, it always ends up demystifying the place. It always ends up making it seem really mundane. We go to Gallifrey on things in episodes like The Deadly Assassin, and look at that, they have public television and news announcers. That's weird, and like it's just so mundane. It's so terrestrial. It's so of our world. I want a sense of otherness, of alienness, of being I'm not necessarily better, but like beyond the sorts of things that you and I do here on Earth. And we almost never get that. Or, like Hellbent, they've got barns like made of wood, and a chunk of their population dresses like his little house on the prairie. What? So there's my initial gut reaction to, look, almost never do, when we get more information about Gallifrey, does it do anything other than make you go, oh, well, that's really very ordinary. I mean, Gallifrey and the Time Lords generally are at their best the less we know about them. When they showed up again in The End of Time, we got a sense of the threat, but they still felt otherworldly. They felt big. It was actually fairly reminiscent of their first official appearance as a society in the War Games, the Second Doctor's era, where we knew almost nothing about them, and it made them so intimidating. But I don't think, between not having a heck of a lot of faith that they're going to be able to consistently give us something that isn't just going to continue to demystify them, and also looking at things like Krypton, I don't think there's anything good to be mined out of this, because again, like I said, Gallifrey works best the less we know about it. And then I'm gonna double down on this and say it would be even worse if it was like a prequel dealing with the Doctor like super young in his first regeneration, like before he was even old enough to look like William Hartnell. Like, that would be awful. Like, no, never, ever, ever, ever do that. I mean, never do like a Gallifrey spinoff in the first place. Really double never, ever do that, because it runs into the classic prequel problem. You can't actually develop the character very much, if at all. And even if you do develop it, it's going to be in a very rigid way, because he cannot end up more developed than how he was when we started following him in the actual Doctor Who show. Which means you either have to have him have no development, or have it be really slow, or you've got to have him start out so far away from what we recognize him as that he can eventually get there over the long haul. And it's going to be painful. It's not going to work. And again, I don't think demystifying the Doctor to that degree is a good idea either. So number 3. And I know a lot of you are going to disagree with me on this, but hear me out. Never make the Doctor ginger. I'm serious. I'm not joking. At this point, it has become such a running thing of the Doctor wanting to be Ginger, not becoming Ginger, that if they ever do it, I think it needs to be the very last incarnation of the show, if not like the very last episode. Like the show's ending and we have the Doctor regenerate into a form that it's presumed goes off and continues to have adventures past the running of the TV show. Like, have that one be Ginger, fine. Because at this point, I treat the Doctor becoming Ginger like the will they, won't they relationships in most other TV shows. At what point do those shows go downhill? When you answer the question of will they, won't they? Because first of all, the answer is always yes, they will. But when you eventually get them together, the entire dynamic changes and you lose a big part of the, oh, well, okay, they did. Why am I still here? And not that I'm saying the Doctor trying to become Ginger is that fundamental to the makeup of the show. I'm not trying to oversell it to that, but it's of that same nature. I think that the continued frustration that he has at not being Ginger is going to be more entertaining than the very brief pop you'll get by finally doing it. I'll stick an asterisk on this and say if they ever do make the Doctor Ginger, I really want the reaction to be that the Doctor looks in a mirror and goes, I'm Ginger. I don't like it. And then never bring it up again. So, but I'd really rather they just didn't do it. Number 2, make the Doctor earthbound. Now, I know there is precedent for this. Most of the third Doctor's era was very terrestrially locked. He almost never went to other planets. And so I understand there's precedent for this. But I mean, there was also what they were doing with the show at that point that made sense. Basically, they wanted to make the Doctor more like James Bond. That's why he did the Venusian Aikido. That's why the Master was like a Bond villain. That's why the Doctor had a car and you know the gadgets like the Who-mobile. Like, that is why all that stuff was there, to give it more of a James Bond flavor, but it then moved off from it. And at this point, especially for how long the show's been around, what a big part of what I love about Doctor Who is the breadth of possibilities, is the fact that he can go, or she, I have to get used to that now, that the fact, or I'll just say the Doctor as often as I can and avoid the gender terms, that the Doctor can go anywhere and any when. I love that breadth of possibilities. And I've seen more than a few people float the idea of maybe with Jodie Whittaker's first season, because it looked like possibly the TARDIS kicked her out, that maybe her whole first series is going to be like trying to reclaim the TARDIS and she'll be stuck on Earth. And oh my God, I hope not. I hope not. I don't want the show to be that limited for that length of a period of time. And that's not even me saying that it's impossible to get good stories out of that. But I would also argue that anything that you get out of doing a long-form terrestrial Brown story, i.e. the more character sort of progression and dynamic growth or whatever, like between the Doctor and the companions or the Doctor and other supporting cast, you can still get that, and having them move to different locations and times and planets and stuff, and you can still write that same stuff in. Being earthbound, it makes you have to do that because you can't go off in space for stuff, but that's not making it earthbound and restricting it is not the only way to be able to do that kind of stuff. You can still do that without making the show earthbound. I don't like those kinds of excessive restrictions being put on the show, because this show appeals to my inner 9-year-old. The part of me that wants to just make believe anything, and the fewer possibilities they are, sort of the less interested I am. So I know this is an idea some people want, and I've seen the idea floated. I really don't want the show to do this one, though. And finally, number 1, and this is a big one. Like, some of these I will grant there's like vaguely possible there was ever so slight sliver of a way that it can be made to work. This one, no. I'm drawing a hard line on this. No. Never. The Doctor Who TV show should never, ever have the Doctor regenerate into an actor that has already played the part. Now, a couple things I have to point out about this. One, I do know that canon-wise in the show, they have opened up that possibility due to Tom Baker's appearance in The Day of the Doctor, which is not something I was against. I still like that. But what I liked about that is because obviously they're not going to cast Tom Baker again in this part, but what I liked about it is, to me, that just implied the endlessness of this show, because we will actually never see the character ever regenerate into this actor again, because like I said, he's never going to play the part again, which means we're never going to reach the end, which means Doctor Who effectively goes on forever. Even if the show ends again, we will never truly reach an end point for this character. That's why I was in favor of that scene, aside from the fact that Tom Baker was just wonderful and delightful. But by implying that Tom Baker was a later regeneration of the Doctor, it opens up the possibility that Matt Smith could come back, David Tennant could come back, any of the living Doctors, feasibly. But I mean, realistically, those would be the two that people would be clamoring for, at least at this point. And I think that more than anything else, more than any of the other things I've named, more than almost anything that I can think of, would be the death knell of this show, because that would be a point at which the show would cease evolving. The show would stop trying to be anything other than fan service. Because the instant the show does, and this show already can get very tied up in its own history and continuity and minutia. Sometimes decently, sometimes to its detriment. But doing something like that, having Matt Smith or David Tennant or Christopher Eccleston or any previous actors play the part be the Doctor again. Not like, here are some extra adventures you didn't know about, but like at the end of Jodie Whittaker's one, she regenerates into Matt Smith. That might be the thing that would make me stop watching Doctor Who. Because at that point, remember I said about breadth of possibilities, endless possibilities? At that point, that feels like a bigger restriction on possibilities than anything else. And what I mean by that is the show is no longer looking forward. It is only looking back. It will be only looking into its own history. It'll only be gazing into its own navel. It is a regressive move. It would be a deliberate attempt to try and be something that it was before instead of figuring out what it can now be. And Doctor Who has always been a show that has evolved through the casting of the Doctor, through the changes in aesthetics, through the changes in the creative team and shifts in priorities in the writing. The show has always been evolving, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. And sometimes they do bring back older elements, and that's fine. But when you literally start putting the old face back on the character again, that's when there's nowhere forward to go anymore. Now you're just swimming in nostalgia. And that might break me if this show ever did that. And that is why I think that is the number one thing this show should never, ever do. So that's my list. 4 things that Doctor Who should not ever do. What do you think are some things they should never do? And please have them be things they haven't already done. Don't just be snarky and go, oh, cast a woman, but they did it. Like, look, guys, it happened, okay? Tell me something the show has not actually done yet that you think it should never do. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. All the stuff to do, like, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter, listen to my podcast, buy a t-shirt. Links for all that stuff is down in the description. And until next time, this council is adjourned.